AITA for refusing to renew the studio lease after my wife let her partner mock me? I'm Jack, 37. At the time, Lauren and I had been married for 10 years, and we have a 7-year-old daughter, Maddie, who believes every blank surface in a house should eventually have one of her drawings taped to it. For most of my marriage, I was fine with being the person in the background. I never needed to be introduced as the guy who paid for this or fixed that. I never needed a thank you speech. I thought there was something mature about quietly doing what needed to be done and not keeping score with the person you loved. Looking back, that was part truth and part excuse. There is a difference between not keeping score and refusing to notice when someone else keeps erasing your name from the scoreboard. When Lauren opened her first studio, it was small and rough around the edges. She had the idea, the clients, the energy, and the ability to make people feel like they belonged there. I believed in her before there was much evidence that the business would work. The first space had ugly beige walls, uneven shelving, and lighting that made everyone look tired. I spent evenings there after closing, painting, putting together storage racks, dealing with a breaker that kept tripping, and calling vendors when something arrived wrong. I still have an old aluminum level from those days. The rubber ends are scuffed, and there is dried white paint on one side. The first time we hung Lauren's sign, she stood back with her hands on her hips and said it looked crooked. I checked it with the level. It's straight, I told her. She tilted her head. It looks crooked. That's because the ceiling is crooked. She laughed and said, "This is why I married you. You're more patient than I am." That was us then. When the initial deposit came due, I covered part of it. When a vendor suddenly wanted payment before delivery, I handled it. When Lauren had a bad month and didn't want to look at the numbers because they scared her, I'd sit at the kitchen table after Maddie went to sleep and go through them with her. Once, during the first year, Lauren texted me, "I could not do this without you." I never screenshotted it for leverage. I never brought it up in arguments. I just kept it because it meant something to me. The studio survived. Then it started doing better than surviving. Lauren got more regular clients. Word spread. She got better at pricing, scheduling, and turning down people who wanted discounts. I watched her become more confident, and I was proud of her. When she started saying "my business" instead of "what we're building," I noticed, but I didn't take it personally. In a way, it was her business. She was the face of it. She had built the client relationships. She worked hard. I told myself that wanting her to say "we" would be petty. Then she started talking about a second location. I happened to own a small commercial unit that I had bought before we were married, using savings and a modest inheritance from a relative. It wasn't some giant building or secret fortune. It was one unit, and it still carried expenses and risk. The tenant who had been there moved out around the same time Lauren was looking to expand. The timing looked perfect. We talked about it at our kitchen table for weeks. Lauren said she wanted the second location to feel more polished than the first. Better mirrors, better sound, a real front desk setup, new mats, laundry equipment, proper storage, cleaner signage. I told her I was willing to lease the unit to the business below what another commercial tenant would likely pay, at least for the first term, to give her room to grow. She hugged me and said, "I swear I'm not taking this for granted." I believed her. I also purchased several pieces of equipment myself because the business didn't have enough cash to do the build-out Lauren wanted without draining its operating account. That meant the receipts were in my email. The charges were on my accounts. The equipment financing for a few larger items was tied to me. Again, I didn't think of that as ownership in an emotional sense. I thought of it as us helping us. That was also around the time Trent became much more involved. Lauren had known him professionally for a while, but when the second studio became real, he moved from occasional advisor to a business partner in everything but the paperwork. Trent was 40, smooth, organized, and the kind of person who could say something insulting with such an easy smile that you felt rude for noticing. He knew how to pitch growth. He talked about brand positioning, scaling, client acquisition, expansion strategy, and making the second location feel like the beginning of something bigger. I didn't dislike him immediately. He was useful. He had ideas Lauren liked, and he was good at getting people excited. The first thing that bothered me was how he described me. Not Jack. Not Lauren's husband. Not even someone who had helped finance the build-out. I became the landlord. He would say things like, "We just need the landlord to sign off on that." Or, "The landlord is being generous on the first term." The first few times, I let it go. Then one afternoon, I was at the new unit checking a storage room outlet before a delivery, and Trent came in with two people who were helping with the opening event. He pointed toward me and said, "That's Jack. He's our private backer and landlord." I said, "Also Lauren's husband." Trent laughed as if I had made a joke. "Right. That too." Lauren was standing close enough to hear it. She looked at me and gave me a small smile, the kind that said, "Don't make this weird." So I didn't. That became a pattern. The closer we got to the launch, the more carefully Lauren separated me from the story she told other people. She talked about the long nights she had put in, which were real. She talked about believing in herself when nobody else did, which was not entirely real. She talked about risking everything on a second location, even though a significant portion of the risk was attached to my property, my credit, and my accounts. I kept telling myself it didn't matter. Then little things started feeling less little. The new sign went up under a name I didn't recognize as the entity we had previously used for business paperwork. I asked Lauren about it. "Branding," she said. I said, "That's not the same name we used on the original paperwork. It's cleaner." "Is it a DBA?" She sighed. "Jack, Trent is handling that stuff." That answer bothered me more than it should have, but I was in the middle of helping secure shelving to the wall, so I let it go. A few days later, I noticed the insurance certificate didn't list the entity I expected. I asked again. Lauren said, "We're restructuring some things for the second location." "What things?" "Nothing that affects you." That sentence stayed with me. Nothing that affects you. I own the unit. I was carrying equipment financing. I was still a billing contact with vendors because I had handled parts of the build-out. But apparently, the restructuring had nothing to do with me. The opening party was on a Saturday evening, right before the formal opening week. Lauren told me ahead of time that the speeches were more for clients and partners. I remember standing in our kitchen when she said it. Maddie was at the table coloring something with purple markers. Lauren was checking something on her phone. "You don't need to stand up there during the thank you part," she said. "I wasn't planning to give a speech." "I know. I just don't want you to feel awkward if it's mostly business people." I looked at her. "Why would I feel awkward?" She gave me a tired smile. "You know what I mean." I didn't actually. But Maddie was asking me whether cats could have blue eyes, and I didn't feel like turning it into a fight. The day of the launch, I spent part of the afternoon at the studio. The ribbon across the front wasn't straight. The pastries were sitting on a folding table covered with a white cloth that was too short on one side. There were cheap champagne bottles and tubs of ice, handwritten name tags near the entrance, and a speaker system that kept disconnecting from Bluetooth. I fixed the speaker. I checked the storage room. I tightened one loose shelf. I moved a box of extra mats out of sight because Lauren said it ruined the pictures. By the time guests started arriving, there was dust on my shoes from the back room. Cole, Lauren's younger brother, saw me carrying a box and grinned. "Look at you," he said. "Finally found a way to be useful." I looked at him. He laughed harder because he thought I was annoyed. I said, "Careful. Compliments like that might go to my head." That was Cole's whole personality around me. He liked jokes where I was the punchline, and because I usually didn't react, he had convinced himself I enjoyed them. Sharon and Russell arrived not long after. Sharon kissed Lauren on both cheeks and looked around like she personally owned the room. "This is incredible," she said. "You did all of this." Lauren smiled. "Not all of it." For half a second, I thought she was going to mention me. Then she looked at Trent. "I had help." Trent put a hand over his heart and bowed. Everybody laughed. I stood 3 feet away. That should have told me how the rest of the night would go. The launch itself was actually going well. Clients were taking pictures. People were talking about booking packages. Lauren looked happy. I wanted to be happy for her. I was happy for her. That is part of what made the rest hurt so much. After about an hour, Trent tapped a glass with a spoon and asked everyone to give him a minute. People gathered loosely around the front desk. I stayed near the side wall. He thanked the clients, the vendors, the people who had helped with branding, and Lauren's family. Then he lifted his plastic flute and said, "And most importantly, to the people who actually built this place." Cole called out, "Not the landlord." A few people laughed. Trent looked directly at me. "Well, every dream needs somebody to unlock the door." More laughter. Not everyone laughed, to be fair. A couple of people looked uncomfortable. But enough did. I looked at Lauren. This was the moment. She knew what I had put into that room. She knew the rent arrangement. She knew whose account had paid for the mirrors. She knew who had covered the sound system and front desk terminal. She knew Monday's renewal paperwork was sitting in my email because the current build-out and soft launch arrangement was about to roll into the formal operating term. She could have said one sentence. She could have said, "Actually, Jack has done a lot more than unlock the door." She didn't. She smiled into her glass. Trent continued. To Lauren, who proved you don't need anyone's permission to build something of your own. People clapped. Sharon looked at me and said quietly, "A secure husband would be proud." I said, "I am proud." She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me. Then she added, "Some men get uncomfortable when their wives outgrow them." I don't remember exactly what I said after that. Probably nothing useful. I remember looking across the room at the new sign. It was perfectly level. I had helped hang the mounting hardware, but the name on it was attached to an entity I still didn't understand, under a story that apparently had no room for me except as the guy holding the keys. I stayed another 20 minutes. I helped clean up a spill because a client nearly slipped. Then I went home. Lauren came home later after Maddie was asleep. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water. She put her bag down and said, "You disappeared. I came home. You could have told me." I didn't want to interrupt the people who actually built the place. Her face changed immediately. "Oh, come on." I kept my voice low because Maddie's room was down the hall. "Why didn't you correct him?" "Correct what?" "That I'm just the landlord who unlocks doors." She exhaled hard. "Jack, it was a joke." "Was it?" "Yes." "Cole's joke too." She rolled her eyes. "Why are you making this into an ego thing?" That hit harder than Trent's speech. I said, "I'm not asking why nobody applauded me. I'm asking why my wife stood there while people laughed at the idea that I had nothing to do with any of it. You always said you didn't want credit." I said I didn't need credit. "That is the same thing." "No, it isn't." She crossed her arms. "You hate attention. You hate networking. You don't want to be on stage. Now suddenly you're angry because I didn't give you a public thank you." I stared at her for a few seconds. I did not need applause. I needed my wife not to laugh while people erased me. I didn't laugh. "You smiled." "Because I was standing in front of clients." "What did you want me to do? Start an argument during my launch?" "No. I wanted you to tell the truth." She looked away. That was the first moment I felt something deeper than anger. Not suspicion exactly. More like a shift in the floor. Lauren grabbed her phone off the counter and said, "Can we not ruin tonight?" I almost laughed at that. She went upstairs. Before she did, she turned around and said, "Also, I need you to sign the renewal packet Monday morning. Trent wants the insurance and occupancy paperwork finalized before the first full week." I said, "Send me the full packet." She stopped. "It's just housekeeping. Then it should be easy to read." "Jack." "I'm not signing anything I haven't read." She stared at me like I had changed the rules. Maybe I had. The next morning, Lauren was distant but polite. We didn't argue in front of Maddie. I made pancakes. Lauren cut up strawberries. Maddie told us a long story about a girl in her class who had lost a tooth during lunch. For an hour, we looked like a normal family. Then Lauren left to go handle something at the studio. That afternoon, an invoice hit my personal email from one of the vendors. It wasn't unusual for me to get vendor emails. I had been the billing contact during the build-out because I was the one placing several orders. What was unusual was the company name on the invoice. It was addressed to an entity with initials that matched Lauren and Trent. Not the original business entity I knew. Not my name. Not anything we had discussed. I opened the invoice. It was for equipment delivery and installation at the second studio. The notes referred to the new entity as the account holder. I searched my email for the entity name. There were more messages than I expected. Most were routine threads where I had been copied months earlier and then stopped paying attention because Lauren and Trent were handling the details. I started reading. I didn't hack anything. I didn't go through Lauren's phone. I didn't break into a private account. I read emails that were already in my inbox because I was a billing contact, property owner, guarantor, or purchaser. The more I read, the less the launch speech felt like a joke. I pulled up my copy of the lease arrangement. The initial agreement covering build-out and the opening period was set to roll over only if I signed the formal renewal and assignment documents. I checked the equipment receipts. Mirrors, mats, sound system, front desk terminal, washer and dryer, shelving. Some were purchased outright by me. Some were financed through accounts where I was responsible. I pulled up old correspondence with a commercial broker from before Lauren moved in. The market estimate for the unit was noticeably higher than what I was charging Lauren's business. Then I checked the insurance emails. The new certificate had indeed changed the named operating entity. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and started making notes on paper. Not a dramatic evidence board. Just dates, account names, amounts, and questions. What is the new entity? Why is the insurance different? Who owns the equipment under the proposed structure? What exactly am I being asked to sign Monday? Around 5, Lauren came home. Maddie was in the living room building something with plastic blocks. I asked Lauren, "What is LT Holdings?" I'm changing the exact initials here, but the real name was basically that obvious. Lauren froze for half a second. Then she said, "It's the new operating entity." For the second studio? Yes. When were you planning to tell me? I did tell you we were restructuring. You said it didn't affect me. It doesn't, except for the lease paperwork. I turned the laptop toward her. The vendor account is being moved to it. That's normal. The insurance is being moved to it. Also normal. Are my equipment purchases being moved to it? She frowned. You're making this sound shady. I'm asking a question. She glanced toward the living room. Not in front of Maddie. I agree. We waited until Maddie was upstairs taking a bath. Then we went back to the kitchen. I asked again. Are my equipment purchases being transferred to the new entity? Lauren leaned against the counter. It's not a transfer like you're making it sound. What is it like? The business has to evolve. That isn't an answer. She rubbed her forehead. Trent has a lawyer helping clean up the structure. The first setup was messy. This one separates things properly. Separates what? The second location from the old business. And from me. Her expression tightened. You said you didn't want credit. I actually laughed once because it was such a strange answer. I asked about ownership. You're acting surprised now because you never cared about this stuff before. I cared enough to buy the equipment. You wanted to help. Yes. And I appreciated it. Then show me the agreement. She said nothing. Lauren, show me the operating agreement. It's a draft. That's fine. It's not final. Even better. Why are you doing this now? I looked at her. Because you want my signature Monday. She picked up her phone. I'm not doing a legal interrogation in our kitchen. Then she walked away. That night, I slept badly. Around 1 in the morning, I went downstairs. I wasn't planning some revenge. I was trying to figure out whether I was overreacting. That possibility mattered to me. I had been humiliated. I was angry. Angry people can turn ordinary paperwork into conspiracy if they want to see one. So I forced myself to read slowly. I compared the lease language to the renewal packet Lauren had finally forwarded. I checked bank alerts. I checked receipts. I checked the vendor threads. That was when I found the email. It wasn't buried in some secret inbox. It was in a long forwarded billing thread from a vendor who had asked who should be named on a revised invoice. Trent had forwarded part of a conversation to Lauren. Lauren had replied. Later, the chain had been forwarded back to the vendor, with me still copied on the thread because I was the original billing contact. I had never read the middle of it. Now I did. Trent had written that it would be cleaner if the lease and equipment rights were aligned under the new entity before the opening week. Lauren replied that they needed to be careful about timing. Then came the sentence that ended any doubt I had. He won't sign if he reads it before launch. I read it 3 times. There was more. Trent responded that once the opening was public, I would be under too much pressure to create a problem. Lauren wrote that she would present the renewal packet as routine housekeeping. I sat there in the dark kitchen, listening to the refrigerator hum. That was the point where this stopped being about a bad joke at a party. Lauren knew. She knew I would object if I understood the documents. She knew they were relying on me not reading them. The next morning, I asked her one more time. I did it while Maddie was at school. I said, before we do anything else, I want you to tell me exactly what the new agreement does with the lease and equipment. Lauren looked tired. She said, it standardizes the business. Does it move control to you and Trent? We already control operations. That's not what I asked. Jack, I can't keep having the same conversation. Does the new entity get rights to equipment I paid for? It needs to use the equipment to operate. Does the agreement call me a temporary private backer? Her face went still. That answer was enough. I continued. Does it reimburse me less than what I put in? She stared at me. Where did you see the draft? I saw enough. You went through my email? No. You and Trent put it in a vendor thread that came to my email. Her eyes closed for a second. Then she said, you're taking language out of context. Show me the context. It's a draft. Then show me the draft. She sat down. For the first time, she looked scared instead of defensive. She said, I thought once we were stable, I could fix the paperwork. Fix it how? Make sure you were paid back fairly. After I signed away the leverage to ask. That's not what this is. Then what is it? She looked at me and said, I wanted one thing that looked like mine. That sentence hurt because I understood it. Lauren had spent years building something real. I knew people sometimes looked at married women with successful businesses and immediately asked who funded them, who helped them, who was behind them. I could imagine how much she hated that. But understanding why she wanted the story did not make the story true. I said, you could have had something that was yours without pretending I was dead weight. I never called you dead weight. You didn't have to. You let Trent do it for you. That's unfair. Is it? She started crying then, but not dramatically. She just put her face in her hands for a minute. Part of me wanted to comfort her. That instinct was still there. That made me angrier at myself than anything else. Finally, I said, I'm not signing the renewal. Her head snapped up. You can't do that. I can. You'll destroy the opening. I'm not signing a document you hid from me. We can change the agreement. Then change it. Monday is the deadline. That isn't my emergency. She stood up. People have appointments. I know. Staff have shifts. I know. You're punishing all of them because you're mad at me. I'm not closing the studio today. I'm refusing the long-term renewal and transfer. We can put a short written arrangement in place for existing appointments while this gets sorted out. Her mouth tightened. So you're going to hold my business hostage? No. I'm going to stop pretending my signature is a formality. That afternoon, I sent a written notice. I kept it dry. No insults. No mention of the launch joke. I stated that I would not sign the proposed renewal, lease assignment, equipment transfer, personal guarantee, or any document allowing my name or property to support the new entity without full disclosure and an agreement I had reviewed independently. I also stated that any equipment I owned remained mine unless we signed a separate written transfer. I offered a limited 14-day arrangement to protect clients who had already prepaid or booked, provided the studio did not represent that the new entity had a long-term lease. Then I contacted an attorney. That part cost money immediately. Retainers have a way of turning emotional problems into very real numbers. Lauren got the notice while she was at the studio. She called me 6 times. I answered the 7th. Are you serious? She asked. Yes. Trent says the insurer is going to have a problem with this. Then Trent can stop treating my signature like office supplies. Can you stop making everything about him? I would love to. Send me an agreement that doesn't give him control over my property. She hung up. Then Sharon called. I almost didn't answer, but I knew ignoring her would just make her call more. She started with, I don't know what has gotten into you. I said, then you probably shouldn't be calling me about it. Lauren is devastated. I'm sure she is. You are punishing her because people finally see her as successful. No. A secure husband would be proud. You already used that line. She went quiet for a second. Then she said, do not punish her because people finally see her. I said, Sharon, do you know whose property the second location is in? She paused. That's not the point. Do you know who bought the mirrors? Silence. The sound system? Jack, marriage is not a ledger. I agree. That's why I never gave you a ledger. Lauren and Trent created one. They just planned to leave the liabilities on my side. She told me I was being dramatic. Russell called later. He was calmer. He said, "Sometimes a husband has to get out of the way." I said, "Of what?" "Her growth." "I'm not in the way of her growth. You're withholding the building." "I own the building." He sighed like I was a difficult teenager. "Then be proud and stay out of the business side." "I'm being asked to sign the business side." He didn't have much to say after that. Cole sent me a text. "Congrats, bro. You found a way to make her launch about you." I replied, "Ask Lauren who paid for the equipment you were standing next to when you said I was finally useful." He didn't respond for 2 days. The following evening, Lauren told me Trent wanted to meet. I said I would meet, but only if we discussed the actual documents. She asked whether her parents could come because they were already involved. I said fine. That was probably the most questionable decision I made. A private conversation between spouses had turned into a business dispute, and then into a family spectacle. Part of me knew that bringing everyone into one room would embarrass Lauren. Part of me also knew they had already decided I was jealous and unstable based on whatever version they had been told. I was tired of defending myself against a story without showing the facts underneath it. We met at the second studio after closing. The launch decorations were mostly gone, but a few unopened champagne bottles were still under the folding table. The ribbon from Saturday had been tossed behind the front desk. Trent stood near the desk with his sleeves rolled up. Lauren sat at a small table with Sharon and Russell. Cole leaned against the wall like he was there for entertainment. I brought printed copies of the documents I had the right to access, mostly because I didn't want the meeting turning into everyone talking over a laptop screen. Trent started before I had fully sat down. "Jack, nobody is stealing your little building." I looked at him. "That's your opening?" He smiled. "I'm trying to lower the temperature. Calling it my little building is a strange way to do that." Lauren said, "Can we just get through this?" Trent spread his hands. "The issue is simple. The company needs a stable lease. You agreed to support Lauren's expansion. Now, 3 days before full opening operations, you're pulling the rug out." I said, "I agreed to lease the unit to the business structure I understood. I did not agree to transfer rights to an entity I wasn't told about. It's an operating entity." "Then why wasn't it disclosed?" "It was." "No. Lauren told me it was branding." Lauren looked down. Trent continued, "This is what growth looks like. Structures change. You either understand that, or you slow everyone down." I pulled out the lease copy. The first location entity was supposed to be the tenant. The proposed renewal changes that. "Yes." "To your new entity." "Yes." With language allowing equipment used in the premises to be treated as operating assets unless separately scheduled. Trent's smile faded a little. "That can be revised." "Good. It should have been revised before you asked me to sign it." Sharon interrupted. "You're acting like they were trying to rob you." I said, "I haven't used that word." "You're certainly implying it." "I'm describing documents." Trent leaned back. "Jack is the landlord. He's using a landlord dispute to interfere in a business decision." I looked at him. "If I was just the landlord, why is my account paying for your equipment?" Nobody said anything for a second. I slid the receipts across the table. Mirrors. Sound system. Front desk terminal. Laundry equipment. Shelving. Not every item in the studio. Not even close. But enough that the room would not look the way it did without them. Then I slid over the equipment financing statements. Trent glanced down. Lauren didn't. I said, "Here is the lease rate. Here is the old broker estimate from before Lauren moved in. You can see the difference." Russell picked up the paper. He frowned. Sharon said, "So you helped your wife. Congratulations." "That isn't the accusation I'm answering." "What accusation?" "That I'm a jealous landlord sabotaging a successful woman I had nothing to do with." Lauren finally said, "Nobody said you had nothing to do with it." I looked at her. "Saturday night?" "That was a joke." "Then Monday's paperwork." Her face tightened. Trent jumped in. "The reimbursement language addresses his contribution." I pulled out that page. "Yes. It calls me a temporary private backer and schedules reimbursement below what I actually paid." "That was a draft number." "Based on what?" Projected cash flow. So the entity gets use of the assets. I take less than I put in, and you too control the entity. Operational control, he corrected. I almost admired the confidence. Lauren said, I told you it was cleanup. I looked at her. This is the part one need you to stop doing. Doing what? Pretending we disagree because I don't understand business. You don't understand why we structured it this way. I understand enough. I pulled out the email. Lauren's expression changed before I even read it. That told me she knew exactly what it was. I said, you wrote, he won't sign if he reads it before launch. Sharon looked at Lauren. Russell stopped looking at the lease. Cole pushed off the wall. Trent said, that email is out of context. I looked at him. I would love the context where that sentence means something better. He started talking about timing, legal drafts, and reducing confusion before launch. I barely listened. I was watching Lauren. She looked exhausted. Finally, she said, I knew you would overreact before we had a chance to stabilize things. I said, so you hit it. I delayed explaining it. That is a very polished way to say hit it. I was going to fix it. When? After the opening. After I signed. She looked away. There it was. Not Trent manipulating a naive wife. Not a misunderstanding. Lauren had made a decision. Maybe Trent encouraged it. Maybe he sold her on the idea. Maybe he made it sound normal. But she knew. Sharon said, Jack, even if she handled this badly, you are still destroying her dream over paperwork. I turned to her. I'm not destroying her dream. You are closing the doors. No, I'm closing my wallet and my signature. That is the same thing right now. Then maybe I was more than the landlord. Nobody had an answer to that. I looked at Lauren. You wanted me invisible until the bill came due. She flinched. I didn't enjoy that. That is one thing I want to be clear about. There was no movie moment where I felt powerful and everyone suddenly respected me. I felt sick. This was my wife. These were my in-laws. The studio was something I had spent years helping her build. I wasn't exposing strangers. I was pulling apart my own life in a room where I had installed shelving 2 weeks earlier. Trent started again. He said, we can revise the operating agreement tonight. You can sign the renewal tomorrow. No reason to blow up the entire week. I said, I'm not signing tomorrow. Lauren stared at me. Jack. No. You said if we changed it. I said change it. I did not say I would sign immediately after discovering you planned to get my signature before I read it. Trent's voice sharpened. So what do you want? Transparency. That's vague. Fine. The new entity gets no lease assignment until I have independent review. My equipment stays separately owned unless there is a written purchase at an agreed value. I do not sign a personal guarantee. I do not fund additional expansion. Existing prepaid appointments can be honored during the 14-day temporary access window if the insurance arrangement works. After that, you either have a valid agreement or you stop operating from my unit. You're holding all the cards, Trent said. No, I'm holding the cards with my name on them. He stood up. This is ridiculous. I said, then walk away. He looked at Lauren. For the first time since I had met him, he didn't look smooth. He looked irritated. Not angry because I had hurt Lauren. Angry because the deal was harder now. That told me more about him than any speech could have. The meeting ended badly. Sharon cried. Russell told me he thought I was making a permanent decision out of temporary anger. Cole didn't say much. Trent left first. Lauren stayed sitting at the table. I gathered my papers. When I reached the door, she said, I hope you're happy. I stopped. I'm not. Then I left. The next week was messy. The doors did not simply get chained shut the next morning. I had no interest in punishing clients who had prepaid or part-time workers who had been scheduled based on decisions they didn't know anything about. The attorney helped put the temporary 14-day access arrangement in writing. The studio had to move some appointments because the insurance and operating entity problem couldn't be fixed as quickly as Trent had promised. Some clients accepted transfers back to the first location. Some asked for refunds. Some were annoyed. Lauren had to explain that the second location's opening schedule had changed because the lease and ownership structure were still being finalized. She did not tell clients our marriage was imploding. I appreciated that. Trent became much less interested once it was clear he was not getting an easy lease transfer, control of the equipment, or my guarantee. Within about a week, he was talking about misaligned expectations. By the end of the temporary period, he was out of the deal. He did not lose his career. Nobody destroyed him. He just stopped seeing the second studio as an attractive opportunity once the invisible support under it was no longer available on his terms. That felt appropriate. Lauren was furious with him. Then she was furious with me. Then, for a while, she seemed mostly furious with herself. The second location did not disappear permanently, but the grand expansion stopped. Lauren moved some equipment back to the first studio after we documented what belonged to whom. A few items she had paid for stayed with her. Items I owned came back to me or were stored while we sorted things out. She refunded some clients. She transferred others. She cut back the plan. The first studio kept operating. That mattered to me because, despite everything, I did not want to destroy the work Lauren had actually built. She had built something real. My mistake had been thinking that because her work was real, I had to pretend mine wasn't. Her family fractured into camps, which I hated. A couple of relatives who had been at the launch quietly apologized to me after hearing what happened. Sharon did not apologize. She changed tactics. She stopped saying I was jealous and started saying I had handled the situation too publicly. There is some truth in that. I could have refused the renewal without laying the email on the table in front of her parents and brother. I could have insisted that the dispute stay between Lauren, Trent, and me. Part of me wanted the people who laughed at me to understand exactly what they had been laughing at. I won't pretend otherwise. That was revenge, at least a little. Not the refusal to sign. That was self-protection. But reading the email in front of the same family who had told me I was insecure? Yes. There was anger in that decision. I can own that. Russell eventually called me alone. He said, I didn't know the finances were like that. I said, you didn't ask. He sighed. No. That was as close as he came to apologizing. Cole sent me a text a few days later. Didn't know you had that much in it. Joke was out of line. That was his apology. I took it. I didn't need a ceremony. At home, things were worse. Lauren and I stopped sharing financial access immediately except for household expenses that still had to be handled. We opened separate accounts where needed. We documented business-related obligations. We met with attorneys. We also started counseling because Lauren asked. The first session was awful. She said I had humiliated her in front of her family. I said she had humiliated me in front of clients and then tried to use the pressure of the launch to get my signature. She said those were not equivalent. I said I agreed. That did not make the session better. The counselor asked what I wanted. I realized I did not know. I still loved Lauren. That was the problem. If I had stopped loving her, the decisions would have been easier. But I no longer trusted her when she said, it's just paperwork. I no longer trusted her when she said something did not affect me. I no longer trusted that the version of our marriage she presented to other people matched the version she believed when we were alone. We kept counseling for a while. Then I asked for a legal separation. Lauren cried when I told her. She said, so you're done. I said, I'm saying I need legal boundaries while we figure out whether there is anything left to repair. She said, that sounds like being done. Maybe it was. I did not move out immediately. We took time figuring out what would be least disruptive for Maddie. That was the part no one at the studio meeting had to think about. Maddie did not care about operating agreements. She cared that Mom was sleeping in the guest room. She cared that Dad looked tired. She cared that one night Lauren and I stopped talking when she walked into the kitchen. She asked, are you mad at each other? Lauren looked at me. I said, we're having grown-up problems, but they are not your job to fix. Maddie asked, are you getting divorced? I felt like somebody had pressed a hand into my chest. I said, we don't know what everything will look like yet, but you are going to have a mom and a dad who both love you. Later, I told Lauren I did not want Maddie carrying messages between us. No, tell your dad. No, ask your mom. No using a 7-year-old as a courier because 2 adults were too angry to text each other. Lauren agreed immediately. Whatever else had happened between us, we were both careful about that. A month or so after the launch, Lauren and I had the closest thing we ever got to a final honest conversation about why she did it. Maddie was staying with Russell and Sharon for the evening. Lauren and I sat in the same kitchen where I had first asked about the new entity. There were no lawyers. No Trent. No parents. No documents. Just us. Lauren said, "I hated the way people talked about the first studio." "What do you mean?" "They'd say I was lucky you helped. They'd ask if you paid for it. They'd ask if the building was yours. Every time something went well, somebody would bring up you." I said nothing. She continued, "I know you didn't do that. You didn't walk around taking credit. But I felt like I couldn't have one accomplishment without everyone asking what my husband did. So you decided to tell them I did nothing." Her eyes filled. "I wanted one thing that looked like mine. You said that before." "Because it's true." I nodded. "I believe you." She looked surprised. I continued, "I believe that's how you felt. I just don't think feeling that way gave you the right to rewrite what happened." "I know. That is new." She looked down. "I know now." I wanted to believe her completely. Maybe she meant it completely. But trust is strange. An apology can be sincere and still arrive after the part of you that would have trusted it has already changed. Lauren said, "I thought if the second location was clearly mine and Trent's operationally, people would stop treating me like I was playing business with my husband's money." I said, "You could have asked me to step back publicly. You would have." "Yes." She started crying again. "I know. You could have bought the equipment from me properly. You could have paid market rent. You could have found another unit. You could have said you wanted separation between the marriage and the business. I know. You could have been proud without making me a joke." She covered her face for a few seconds. Then she said, "I was ashamed that I needed help." I leaned back in my chair. "I didn't need the spotlight, Lauren. I just needed you not to let them spit on the stage I helped build." She nodded. Neither of us said anything for a while. That conversation did not save our marriage. It did make the end of it less ugly. Counseling continued for a bit, mostly to help us communicate around Maddie and finances. The legal separation moved forward. We divided responsibilities. I paid lawyers more than I ever wanted to pay lawyers. Lauren kept the first studio. The second unit eventually stopped operating as her expansion site once the temporary arrangements ended and no new agreement made sense for either of us. I did not evict her in the middle of a class. I did not seize equipment that belonged to her. I did not empty business accounts. I did not call clients and tell them she was a liar. I simply stopped extending my property, my credit, my signature, and my money into a structure designed to make those things invisible until they were needed. There were consequences for me too. The commercial unit sat underused for a while. I had expenses. I lost money. I lost sleep. I lost a marriage I had believed was stronger than this. And for the first few months, every handoff with Maddie felt like evidence that protecting myself had a cost I could not calculate on a spreadsheet. Eventually, I rented a smaller apartment nearby. The first week, it barely looked lived in. A couch. A table. 2 lamps. A mattress. Maddie arrived carrying a backpack and 3 pieces of construction paper. She had drawn 1 picture of a cat, 1 picture of what I think was supposed to be a dragon, and 1 picture of the 2 of us standing next to something that looked like a purple tree. She said, "These are for my wall here." I told her we didn't have frames yet. She said, "Tape is fine." I found a roll of painter's tape in a box. Then I saw the old level. The same one from Lauren's first studio. White paint still stuck to the side. For a second I was back in that first little space, holding a sign against a crooked wall while Lauren laughed because the ceiling made everything look wrong. Maddie was waiting. "Can this one go above the desk?" she asked. I put the drawing against the wall. She moved it higher. Then lower. Then higher again. I held the level under it. She squinted. "Is it straight?" I looked at the bubble. Almost. I adjusted the paper. There. She smiled. That was it. No grand victory. No ruined enemy. No speech about karma. Just my daughter's crooked drawing hanging straight in a place that was mine, put there with a tool I had once used to help build something I thought would belong to our family forever. For years, I thought being a good husband meant I should not care who got credit. I still don't care much about credit, but I care about the truth. And I learned the difference only after the person I loved most decided my silence was permission to write me out. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.